I want to thank you all for coming. We have a very special guest here to start with, who is Isaac Applbaum. And we're also going to be joined by another special guest, Sundaram Tagore, who is quietly sitting over here. But he came in today, so I said he had to join us as well. But I also want all of you to come back tomorrow. I know my board members have heard this before. But tomorrow at 7 p.m., Sundaram has this wonderful film that he created that he's going to show that's Louis Kahn's Tiger City. So not only will you tell us more about the film tomorrow, but I really want you to consider whether you could do a tour. Like, could we come to Tiger City with you? Because after you see this film, it's like everyone has to go. It's amazing. So that's at 7 p.m.
Will you take a tour privately for us? You'll take us?
Yeah, if you're there during they call the Art Summit in Dhaka. That's become very important.
Okay.
And people are gathering there.
Okay,
We could
should
try
think about
that.
I'll
We
do
could
that.
try that.
Just give me a
Right.
date.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to start with a really short introduction about Yitz, which may or may not be true. So you can tell me if it's
No may or may not. It's may
right.
not.
That's not true. So he is an investor, entrepreneur, and philanthropist who sits at the nexus of global trade between the East and West. He is an advisor to business, philanthropy, and civic leaders in the U.S. and Israel. He holds a BA degree in computer science from Yeshiva University. And he is, more important than all of that, a collector who participates in our Masterworks on Loan program. So we said, thank you very much, and don't you really want to see what we're doing, and wouldn't you like to have a conversation about collecting? So he came, which is really wonderful. And thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So what I've also learned is that he's an international venture capitalist who specializes in tech companies and with global reach. I mean, not just in the US or Israel, but really his companies try and do good in the world all over the place. And it becomes very complex. So I'm not even going in there, but if you want to learn more about it, please ask him. And he is a principal and founding partner at Mizma Ventures, which is a tech company, I think, or
Tech investment company.
Tech and investment company. Also, in terms of his art interests, he is on the board of the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden, Asia Society, and the Jerusalem Foundation. And there may be many other things that I have not mentioned, but he is well known in many fields and highly respected. So, thank you again for being here. And I wanted to start with, and you can always tell me I really don't want to talk about that if you don't want to. But
Will I get away with it or no?
well, you can ask them.
How many
You can
passes do I
ask
get? That's
them.
the question.
Yeah,
I
right.
need to know how many. It's like a test.
Well, I'll try and gauge that, but I don't even know if you consider yourself a collector. Would you call yourself a collector?
You know when I figured out I was a collector? Actually, I was thinking about this. When I got the email invitation to speak here and it said meet a collector, that's when I actually knew I was a collector. Until then, I hadn't actually thought about it. So I like the title. I'm going to kind of stick with it. But I didn't consider myself a collector till recently.
So how did you think about your art acquisitions?
Beautiful things that I bought and I surrounded myself with that I kind of either fell in love with immediately or took some time to fall in love with, and mostly just part of my life. Art has been, I've loved art for a very long time, but I never thought about buying this piece or that piece or having a strategy in art. When I found something that I really liked, I'd acquired, or something that spoke to me, or something I wanted to learn about. So I think after 4 or 5, I have maybe 10 or 15 pieces. After a while, it became obvious that I was collecting, but I had never thought of myself that way.
Huh. And how do you think you became interested in art?
I love art from the perspective of what it teaches me about life, and that I knew from an early stage, going to museums. I've traveled for most of my life I've traveled. Surely from the age of 21 or 22, I've traveled a lot, and I wouldn't really go to a place without stopping in a museum. And I think mostly because I had a relationship, a connection. I can't exactly explain why. And over time, when you find something that you're passionate about and it works for you and it makes you feel good, and going to museums isn't that expensive, then you do more and more and more of it. And I started my collection, although again, I didn't know I was collecting. right after I got married, my wife and I went to New Orleans, great city, and we passed by a gallery, Nahan Galleries, a fairly well-known gallery on the East Coast. And we saw an artist by the name of Theo Tobias, who in a sense is a little bit of a, not a protege, but a lot like Chagall, who eventually is where we really fell in love. And we found some prints there that we liked that we can afford, and they were Jewish themes. Tobias does a lot of Jewish themes, and that speaks to us very much. And so we bought some prints, and my wife would say, that looks really great there, and I'd walk by and I'd kind of study it. And over time, we realized that it was bringing joy and happiness in our lives, and we only paid for it once. It was ours. It was kind of like maybe the best not depreciating asset, but the best return on value, because you see it every day. And then we got to meet the artist, spend some time with Tobias, and he's French, Israeli, so we liked a lot of the themes and that was kind of how we opened up ourselves to actually acquiring art.
So then you moved on from him to Chagall?
No. No, it was a long way from Theo Tobias to Chagall. We spent years acquiring and bringing Tobias into the house. And then we spent some time, and I've spent a lot of time in Israel traveling back and forth. And I found an artist by the name of Reuben, who's Israel's most famous artist.
Right.
And actually, the first piece we bought of his was, I love Jerusalem. I have a home in Jerusalem. A lot of my heart, I'd rather be in Jerusalem than here. Not always so simple, right, because there's other considerations. But for me, Jerusalem was really my home. And I saw a piece at a gallery by Reuben of Jerusalem. There are 4 pieces he did of Jerusalem. I didn't know this till much later, but one sits in the Prime Minister's office, one in the President's home, and one somewhere else, and one in my dining room. And I saw it, fell in love with it, could absolutely positively not afford it, and I bought it anyway. And
See, that's why you're a collector.
Yeah, you know what? Sometimes I think it's addictor, not addictive, but not collecting. And so that's how I started with Reuben, and then I bought a number of other of his pieces, and then another great Israeli artist called Bloom, also mostly Jerusalem scenes, and then Chagall.
And why Chagall? I mean, tell us why you.
His story is the story of the Jewish people. His story is a story of being born with nothing and being born in a town of great anti-Semitism and a very difficult life, a traditional Jewish life. He grew up in an Orthodox home, and he broke out and broke away and went through so many trials and tribulations. And all of his own personal history is in his art. And when you see his art, when you fall in love with his art, when you understand what his background is, it just jumps right out at you. Now, that's not my personal background, but it's surely the background of my family and my grandparents, my great-grandparents. And I also see it as the legacy for the future, because he also does remarkable things about brightness and color and connection. And so it's not just about the historical, the past, but also about how beautiful the future is going to be also. Did
you take any art classes in college?
No. I was a
Okay,
computer
so
science major. No. Computer science, economics, I didn't think about art when I went to school.
Okay, so this is really passion and what calls to you.
Yeah, very much so.
Right?
Very much so.
Huh, good. And do you feel like the way you look at art has changed, or you're like, I don't know if I can use the word connoisseurship, or whether it's still just, I like that? Or
It's somewhere between connoisseurship and I like that. I've definitely gotten a little more sophisticated. I know I want to acquire more art. I know it when I like it, but then I'll spend some time studying it, learning more about the piece, because it's not just Chagall. I'm expanding a little bit. I've recently bought a Max Lieberman, a great artist who also suffered for the Holocaust, and there's a lot of stories about his art. So I'll kind of read up on an artist, see an artist. Look, I go to all many of the auctions, Sotheby's and Christie's, and so I'll see something that I like, and then I'll spend a lot of time learning about it. I wouldn't just buy a piece because I saw a great piece I like. It might take me a year or 2 or 3 after understanding the artist, learning about the artist, and then if it sticks with me and it takes an imprint on me, then I start looking.
You were telling an interesting story last night at dinner about where you put the Chagalls to begin with, and can you share that?
Yeah, that's not for the tape. I didn't want to put it in our living room because I was kind of, I didn't want people to think, oh, look, he has a little money, or start talking, and so I put all our great art in my office. And at some point it just wasn't fair because we have some really nice pieces and we weren't sharing it. And the other pieces, I kept one of my Chagalls in my office because one of the things that I found in collecting or acquiring art is when you go to a museum, you get 10 minutes, 15, 30 minutes is the most I can ever spend in front of a piece. But if I'm sitting at my office desk and I'm looking at a piece, I've owned this particular piece for about 4 or 5 years. Even till today, I see new things in that art every day. It's quite staggering. One piece of art, and I see something new I hadn't seen. I thought I really knew the piece really well. So I love the fact that I have a wonderful piece of art that speaks to me right in front of me, but I share it now also. We put it downstairs.
How do you find the pieces that you acquire?
Lots of ways. Originally, I had no idea how to find art. Now, I go gallery shopping all the time. If I'm in a city and I have an extra couple hours, I'll go down to Soho, or surely in Tel Aviv, I'm looking all the time. I try and go to Christie's and Sotheby's, at least the New York and London auctions if I can, but if not, they're brilliant. They send you these books that you just want to fall in love with, right? And so you're sitting looking at the books, and so I definitely do auctions, and I have someone who I've worked with in the past who shows me pieces from time to time, but it's mostly galleries. Sometimes I'll go to a museum, see an artist whom I don't know well, spend lots of time learning about the artist, and then I go seek that piece out. And if you're looking for something, you can find it.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Do you have a favorite museum?
Oh, that's not fair. Oh, I have so many favorite museums. In Paris, the Jeu de Pompe is one of my very, very favorite museums. I have to say, I wouldn't say the Hirshhorn a year ago or 2 years ago, but since I've been on the board, and you go to the place over, I've been now 6 times, I've taken groups, all of a sudden you kind of know the nooks and the crannies of the place. So I'd have to say that I'm learning about contemporary art more than anything else. I'd say the Hirshhorn is one of my favorite museums also.
Oh, interesting. Good. And what would you say to someone who says, oh, I don't have enough wealth or resources to collect, but, how would you tell them to go about collecting? Or what advice might you give someone?
Well, I'd start this way. Every time I see a new centimillionaire or billionaire in Silicon Valley, I say, there can't be any more new rich people. Every idea has already been thought of. How could there be? It's 2018. The bubble, the bust has come. So first of all, there's a lot of fortunes to be made over and over again. So just because you have an idea and you think someone else has done it or it can't be done, you have to think about the fact that the next guy's going to do, the next gal's going to do it. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, again, through the Hirshhorn, I've met, it's a very interesting board, and I'd say that X%, with X being greater than 10%, of the members of the board there have made tremendous wealth in art collecting, and not by buying, Picasso at 10 million and turning it into 20, but by buying some of the artists who you represent and having an eye for the future. So I think that understanding contemporary, because you're not going to be able to, buy something from, 100 years ago. So I think understanding contemporary art's very, very important. And lastly, nothing's too cheap and nothing's not good enough, because we started with 4 Tobias prints on a Shavuot suite, which I remember like yesterday, were $1,200. Now today they're worth $2,000. So I didn't get rich on it, but it still hangs on our stairwells and we love it. But that's how we started collecting. We just bought what we liked and what we can afford. Right. And then, of course, every once in a while you stretch, you stretch. But at the beginning, just buy what you like and,
take it
pray that it's going to work.
Right, that you still like it, or that you. Yeah. But yeah, I wish I'd bought Kusama many years ago. I was just thinking about that one.
Crazy demand for our work.
Yeah. So I'm going to bring Sundaram up in just a minute, but I wanted to ask you, do you see your art as separate, say, from your interest in business or other areas, or do you compartmentalize, or does it all work together in your life? How does that?
So art is an asset class, and on my balance sheet, I actually have art as an asset class, and I do that mostly for insurance reasons. So I do view art as just an asset class, and And I can get a little out of control, and the truth is that's a mistake,
Yeah.
because you have to feed your family and send your kids to school, and I'm not that crazy, but you have to be careful. So yes, I do see it as a balance sheet mind, but I think it's all part of who we are. I don't see any of our assets really that are separate from one another. I have a kind of strategy on how I live my life, and try and do what I do here, benefit what I do here, and what I do for this person, benefit that person. And I think the same is true of my art. It's congruous with our Jewish culture, our legacy, what we want our kids to take from us. And so it's part of who we are. And there are outliers in some of my art, clearly, but most, I mean, I like hanging out my comfort zone, and my art's there also.
And so, speaking of your kids, what do your kids think about your art?
Oh, who was here at lunch? We had an interesting conversation about that. On the one hand, kids don't want the burdens of their parents under any circumstances, and for those of you that have kids, you know it's quite complex. On the other hand, we've educated our kids. They've gone to very good schools, and we've taken them to every museum on the planet that I can think of, and so they have a great appreciation for art. Do they have appreciation for our art? You know, you can ask them. I'm not sure. I think some of the pieces will be interesting to them, but my wife and I talk about it. Should we? Well, most of the money in our state is going to go into a foundation when we pass. We've already figured out how to allocate our assets to the kids. So what do we do? It's the one thing we haven't figured out is the art. So do we just sell it upon our demise? Do we think what we think the kids want? Do we ask them? So it's added a complexity to our lives a little bit, but we'll figure it out.
You can always give it to us. You know,
You know
if
what?
you can't decide.
Oh,
It's all right.
Actually, speaking of us, I do want to share my experience of the last 24 hours. 'cause
Okay. All right.
I've had if that's okay.
No, do.
I've had a really outstanding 24 hours here. It's just that I haven't been to an academic museum before, and I've been showing art here for the last 3-4 years, and it's quite remarkable what's going on here. I think most of you already know it, but the fact is you're enabling, this museum here is enabling students to do things they could really not do in many other places. And I think some of the programs that are happening here, this sports program, art for athletes and art for pre-med students and art for doctors, and having people inculcate art, integrate art into their life as a way of thinking and observing is quite remarkable. And of course, to come to a museum like where are we? Eugene, Oregon, right? To come into Eugene and see some, who did we see today? The Spanish artist who died at 27. Basquiat, to see 2 or 3 Basquiats, that's what you see when you go to the Met, right? So it's quite amazing to
I think we
have
got
that
4
kind of,
Basquiats on view right now.
So I think what you're doing here is quite remarkable.
Yeah, well, it's partly thanks to people like you. I mean, it would not happen without that. So it's important, really important, both to share the art and the learning experiences and the resources that can let us do so much. But thank you. I'm glad we're doing well.
Yeah.
Would you like to join us?
Sure.
Here. And I hadn't really prepared a whole introduction to Sundaram, whom I've known maybe once or twice a year at various art fairs, and always been astounded by the artists that he represents, but also especially by his sensibility. And I think that came through more than anything with this exhibition that you did in Venice a few years back.
Well, you were there.
Oh, it was unbelievable. And there were artists that I've always wanted to work with that are like, oh my God, he knows about them, and he knows about them too. So maybe we could start a little bit, because this won't come up tomorrow, in terms of where your interest in art came from.
Well, I first of all, you're going to forgive me. I just flew in from Singapore, so I'm slightly slow in terms of the jet lag that's creeping in slowly. And I wasn't thinking about it. But I come from a family of artists and writers and poets. And my father collected art, and he was building a museum. And he spent a lot of time actually collecting. And unfortunately, he partially built that museum, and then he died. And that was never able to, we weren't able to return back to India and sort of take over that that foundation that he had built and then carry it through.
Wow.
So it got left unfinished. So the government spent some time working on it and putting together a collection in terms of cataloging everything that he had done. But he did it purely out of passion. There was, in those days, no one really cared about whether you were going to flip it or you were going to, the kind of languages that we have acquired today. Even when I went to New York in the mid-'80s, I remember we used to call the art world, and today we call it the art market. And that alone has a psychological shift, how we look at art. And it's a big shift, because most of the artists that I knew, I landed in Soho, and I was living in Soho in those days. And I would bump into all these artists, actually, and a large number of Russian artists. And what happened is that one of the Russian artists, he asked me, will you write a catalog for me? And I said, okay, sure. So he gave me a painting as a gift, which when I had left New York, I had moved to Europe. Actually, I was living there. I moved to Venice, actually, for Peggy Guggenheim. And I would return back to my friends, to stay with them, because that's how I could keep a connection with New York. And so finally, I gave that painting as a gift for the wedding. I said, it's been hanging in your house for so long. And, someone just gave it to me, so I just turned around and gave it to him. And you'd be surprised what happened, 8 or 9 years later. The kind of prices that skyrocketed. So, but none of us, actually, when we collected art, we didn't think about it's going to become very, very expensive at some point and we're going to sell it. We just bought art because we liked it, and that was the reason.
All right. And are you still collecting? Or what are your interests?
I did collect. I did seriously collect art, and then during that 2008 recession, I had 5 galleries across the globe. And there were, for about 8 or 9 months, no one walked into those galleries, and all of them, except for Hong Kong. And to maintain all of that, I was just selling it at a distressed price. I would call up my client and tell them, listen, I have these pieces, and if you want it, you can have it. And so that's how I kept it all alive, and I didn't let go of anyone.
Oh, wow.
So I'm rebuilding it now.
Yeah, well, I haven't been to the Hong Kong gallery, but I've been to the Singapore gallery. I think, and Rose and I were there, and it was beautiful. I think there's a Salgado show that was unbelievable. But yeah, so personal collecting, the same artists that you sell or something else?
Yeah, I do collect some of the artists that I represent, but I also collect art from, I started really focusing on Southeast Asia, for instance. The issue with Southeast Asian artists, they're very, very creative, I'm noticing. And they have very little in terms of resources. And for instance, out of flip-flops, they'll make it into, you saw it in Venice, just remarkably sort of talented artists. But the prices are really, really accessible. And I asked some of our gallerist colleagues, why don't you represent these artists? And they said, because the prices are so low that you can't really represent them. Because the cost of running a gallery is so enormous, and paying for all these folks,
Right.
And unless, one of the reasons,
they can't get the higher prices yet.
they can't get the higher prices because the artists will not raise the price because they'll get disconnected from their clients. So that's the main reason,
Oh, how interesting, because I followed and collected Cuban art, which is in the same category, basically, because it should be everywhere, because it's so ingenious and so many things going on, but the prices are relatively low.
At some point it'll change.
Yeah, but I wondered about that. So you also do curatorial work, as that exhibition in Venice showed. Are you thinking about doing that?
I've curated for last a big show I did at the Bangkok Art Museum, and then in Ayala Museum in Philippines, in Manila. And I may be going back to Venice again, but everything costs so much, because when you do a Venice Biennale exhibition, the selection process is enormous, and very complicated. And then once you get selected, then you have to quickly come up with the money, whether you go to Citibank or you go to other places, or you have to write your own personal checks.
Right.
And that's where it is. So you have to secure the financing before you apply. and no
Right.
one will give you the money unless you have a contract from the BNI.
I know, it's really hard. No, I was trying to submit an artist that I really liked for the American Pavilion. And it was like, okay, it's a minimum of $1 million. Can you tell us you have that guaranteed?
Right.
Oh, well, you
You
know?
can just leverage some of the
That-
paintings.
that's
Yeah.
The board would like that.
But that's crazy. So you've talked a little bit about how the art world, art market has changed. Where do you think it's going?
Oh, it's a really what do you call $1 million question? Because what's happening, technology is changing everything. There's a kind of seismic change in the art world. What happened to the publishing world and what happened to other areas is happening in the art world. Galleries are closing down in droves. I know maybe over 200 galleries have closed down. And they
Yeah.
moved online. They haven't shut down. And what they do is they started moving, and these were really, really important galleries. And they were representing large number of artists, and they're closing down. But that doesn't mean the acquisition sort of art is also increasing. But they're buying. When I really started actually, when I had my gallery first time, I started entering an art fair. That was, I knew of maybe 20 art fairs. Today there are 400 art fairs across the globe. You could literally go to every single day you could attend an art fair.
Yeah.
So-
Try that. Why not?
So
I'll follow along. You just take me
So
with
what
you.
happens is that you're getting this kind of art fair fatigues. You keep running from fairs to fairs, and today hardly anyone comes to galleries.
Right.
And unless you have a pulling power, you have a celebrity, or you're having a book launch, or you're having something special, they come for that. But they know because they'll get to some art fair and get to see the artist. And so artists will not sort of want to be represented by you as a gallerist unless you go to art fairs.
Oh,
So
interesting.
the equation
Okay.
has changed.
Right.
Artists used to hate to go to art fairs because there's no context. Because what
Right.
galleries do is they create a context. They
Right.
create a provenance for you.
Yeah.
But you have 10,000 artists being shown in Basel, and then there's you're along with these artists which had no connection with you, and then you're placed with them.
Right.
Except that there are 60,000 collectors there. You know.
And so what I'm wondering too then is that change how collectors collect, or they're making I know that some are studying in advance, so it's like if you knew a Chagall was going to be there, maybe you'd get it before kind of the fair opened, or because we have all these VIPs that come before normal people or whatever. But I'm thinking there are a lot of like quick decisions. I don't know.
Well, they essentially, if you own a gallery and you go to an art fair, the whole idea is to motivate the collectors. And if you make up your mind right now, because what happens is that if you don't buy now, someone else will, and that space that you create, there's kind of you create this psychological space, just like an auction house. You build it up, and
Yeah.
then you continue to build up. You raise your hands.
Yeah.
And unless you have the auction, you're not going to do that. And the same way, unless you have the space, you have 5 days of an art fair. Within the 5 days, if you don't buy, then the artworks will move from, let's say, from Basel back to Miami.
Right.
So you better make up your mind right now.
Right.
So the decision-making process is a lot faster. But what is happening, that qualitative interaction that you had with a collector, you spent an afternoon with him or her, and you talked about art and talked about culture. That's not there as much.
Huh.
It's a completely
Oh,
different
interesting.
place.
I can't imagine buying art at Art Basel, I have to
Yeah. I
admit.
know, yeah.
I collect watches, actually, that's what I really collect. And I'll go to Geneva to the fairs because you see the new line, but then won't buy something for 6 months, a year, 18 months, not like that at Art Basel, and I think that's just a bad way to sell art.
It's true, but
You
you
have
notice,
to.
This is what's happening, and I'm not passing a judgment here.
Me neither.
I'm saying sociologically that's what's happening.
Strike it from the record, I think.
Right. But I buy things at art fairs for this museum, which are not in high echelon of prices, but because I'm in Eugene, Oregon, I don't get to galleries or to New York or other places very often. So the art fairs are a great opportunity for me to see a lot that's going, particularly in contemporary, and having looked at things in advance to say, oh, okay, you have that, or to see something that you know you're never going to get again. So I think the latest one was Murasake. So there was this incredible, I don't know if you were in Venice this year, there's an incredible installation by the South African artist.
Oh, yeah, of course.
So we have it.
Yeah, oh, brilliant.
But
You did the right thing.
But I mean, it was amazing because we're at an untitled fair during Art Basel in Miami, and Richard and I mean, we loved this installation in Venice and thought it was just blew us away. It was one of the best things we had ever seen.
What was it?
It's a 3-channel video that you will see here next year, but I'll tell you more. I mean, you'll see it. But in any case, it was an immersive experience that was really powerful, and it's about Africans kind of, it's the slavery experience of traveling. It's called Passage, and in a very aesthetic and evocative way. But in any case, we were in an art fair, and we saw a photograph from that on a wall in a gallery. And we would never have known what it was, except that we saw the piece in Venice and went to the gallery and said, is that from the video? And it was like, yeah,
Wow.
it was from the video, and it turned out, what, there were 12 editions?
There were 12, and they had only one left, and no American museum had purchased this yet around the world, and it was available. Wow. And
The rest
it was
all went
within
to Europe.
budget, so we got it.
And it was reasonable. And it was reasonable. It was like, oh my God, I could do this. But so in those places, you know, for those of us that don't live in metropolitan areas or, you know, travel as much to them as you do, then it was useful for us. But I contribute to this horrible art fair syndrome.
That's a reality, actually. Yeah. And I know the curators, they all come to the art fairs. Exactly the same reason.
Because we can see
compare
so
immediately,
much.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think there's just 2 or 3 main ones, right? I mean, people don't go to 20 of them a year, do they? Or
Well,
do
if
they?
you're a gallerist, you
If
might.
you're a gallery, so if you're really paying attention to art for other purposes, they're going to fairs.
Yeah.
the time,
And
yeah.
some are
People-
hotter than others at different times.
We have been going to probably between 9 to 12 fairs a year.
Wow.
And
Right.
further and further. Now we are heading Australia. You know,
Oh,
and
yeah.
it's suddenly becoming a big important market.
Yeah.
Why?
Because of wealth, one part, and automatically the important part is that, you know, a large number of these Asian countries, right, they have a great deal of antiquities as an art form, you know, with the temples, with the museums, and you can transfer those, you know, in a state property. But you can't build a museum very quickly. Even if you physically build a museum, where do you create a collection? It'll cost you an enormous amount of money, resources, time, and then you can't, even if you have the money, you can't create a collection. So how do you create a global or world city today? First thing you want to create is an art fair. Can you secure a Basel? So that's why Basel is just about showing up in every other country. And if they don't have a Basel, they have
A frieze or
or some other art form that has some link with something of that sort of caliber. So every other city in Asia, and that's why the proliferation of art fairs across the globe. The reason is that every city in the world wants an art fair. And because with the art fairs, it's not just art alone, with the kind of collectors coming, and then they get exposed to that culture, then the next step is to do business there. And so everyone wants an art fair.
magic word.
Isn't that amazing? I thought every
It's all
major...
to do with art, right?
Right, and I'm also finding major cities that want museums. Dubai, the Louvre, and the
That's right.
Extraordinary Museum in
That's
Qatar. and it's-
franchising, you know.
Yeah.
Started with Guggenheim,
Yeah.
Bilbao, Spain, and we call it Bilbao effect today. If you depressed area, you get a great museum and spend a few $100 million, and overnight the city changes.
Right.
You know.
It's called urban planning in the 20th century, 21st century.
So we use art for a lot of purposes, right? But we shouldn't forget why we are there. We are principally there for art.
Right.
And if we move away from that, and we only talk about economics, which is happening more and more, and a lot of the Asian collectors, because they have been conversant about that, they came from largely, the issue is that if you don't have an education in art, right, like if you don't have a background in art history, you don't have to have a background in art, but you have to pay attention, and you have to read up, and you have to be part of that world. When you are part of that world, something happened. Art really transforms you. It truly is transformational. And just about every collector, you just talked about it. Something happens. Chemically, something happens. Yeah. Initially, you're there in front of it for whatever reason. You're attracted to that work of art. But as you're living with that work of art, and as you're working with this, the world of art, then something happens. And then it's not about acquisition anymore. It is more than that. And I've noticed this over and over again.
Is this spiritual?
And that's exactly what it is, because our cathedral of our society today are the great museums in any secular society. If you look at it's a Metropolitan Museum or the Louvre or any of these, or now we are replacing them with art fairs. But the reason is, I believe,
like revival tents.
Yeah, exactly. That's so true.
Hallelujah.
Pretty
Well,
weird. Yeah, sorry.
I don't know. I'm not exactly sure where this conversation's going, and
not
I'm
yet.
going to start praying. I'm going to start praying in a minute.
We should
you don't want
invite
that.
questions from
Yeah.
all of you and tell us. Yes.
This is true that, the art is, and I believe it is becomes a part of you, if you will. It must have been extremely difficult for you to do accession.
Oh yeah, of course. It was. I felt really depressed at that point, But it was having to give up those galleries and having to give up all those people who have sort of become part of my life, And they would go, and some of them even went. And I encouraged them to go back to universities and move to other places. But So, and in the end, if I'm collecting, in the end, just like all of us, we talk about, you have to bequeath these works or you have to hand it over to someone else. It's not necessarily for yourself per se, But while you're being a collector, what does a collector mean? And maybe you can talk about it. What does it really mean to be a collector?
It's about legacy. I think if you're collecting, it's about what you do with it after you're gone or how you enhance the community. If it's just for me, I come and go, and my things come and go. God forbid there's a fire, anything. But if you're a collector and you're building your storyline, then it's about how you pass it on to the community. And I think the world is a much better place. It took me a long time to understand why people bequeath their artwork at all these museums. Sell it, take the money, give it to the museum. No, I don't even just mean buy more hamburgers with it or steaks, right? But
whatever
just
they need.
Let the museum decide. But the museum can't decide for you because it's 60 years of collecting, of creating, of yourself. And you know what? It's part of what the legacy is. And when you go to the Met or the MoMA and you see these rooms full of people's art, the Tisch collection, all these great collections, you know who these people are. And actually, they're going to live forever. The kids aren't going to live forever, but their artwork will live forever. So I think it's about making this world a better place and having a great time at the same time.
And would you add to that this idea of addiction?
Well, for watches' sake?
Yeah, I'd say it's a
many
problem.
watches?
I'd say it's a problem under any circumstances. Yeah.
I think there are a lot of addicts in this room. Art addicts. But I also think, having worked with collectors who are collecting, say, 18th century furniture or others, that they're taking pieces that have been in so many different hands or families over the time that they see themselves as stewards. Like, I'm going to make sure that nothing happens to this, that it's used for education and enjoyed, and that when it's time to go to someone else, it's in good condition and, it's valued. So they kind of see themselves as temporary custodians of legacy or whatever you want to call it, which is interesting, the older pieces are. We get a lot of contemporary pieces, as you saw upstairs. So some of these have just been around or coming from one private collection and then going into another.
A lot of people don't understand a collection. So I collect mostly art from Jewish artists, but a lot of the contemporary work and the work that you do, people don't understand what that artwork is, and it's take a long time for people to really assimilate it, right? It's that whatever the next generation has to figure it out. So you're creating this environment, not so much for me because I'm on the border of understanding it, right? But for the next generation to see how you've curated a collection because you're a subject matter expert, and there are people like you who are, and so assumably you've studied it, you're passionate about it, you understand it. So you're doing a lot of work for the next generation. How you pass that along and how you position it, how you sell it's going to make a very big difference. And I don't feel like I'm a steward of Chagall. I own a couple of his pieces, but the point is that I do feel like I'm part of that story. And when people come to my home or when I tell the story, people say, wow, I didn't know that about him. Or I didn't know that it can have that effect. And you're doing that in a much more complicated world because you can look at a Chagall and understand what he's saying. I look at some of your stuff and I got to really knock my head against the wall a few times to understand it. So I mean, it's quite amazing what you're doing.
Oh, thank you. But when you talk about Jewish artists, Jewish culture has penetrated in terms of modernism, right? The contribution is so enormous. You can't even think about modernism without thinking about Jewish contribution and Jewish. So when you say Jewish artists, are you talking about Kokoschka or all of these, or Viennese sort of secessionists, or you're talking about the Parisians, or you're talking about contemporary Jewish artists?
Well, I'm talking about all of them actually, but only a few, but only some of them speak to me. And so, and I have a Renoir. I have other pieces that aren't of Jewish artists, but maybe I'll look at a piece because they speak to me more. So I love Modigliani. I can't afford it, right? But that's not wouldn't normally be in my zone. But I know his history and I know his relationship to the era. So for me, I'll kind of mix that all together. But if it's a contemporary piece and I totally don't understand it, I can't listen to Schoenberg. Okay, I can't listen. And as much as I know he's a great musician, it doesn't agree with me. So he's a Jewish artist, so I don't like, right? I mean, just like a lot of artists I don't like. But if it's Mendelssohn, let's say, and I really love the piece, then maybe I'm a little more connected. So I don't want to paint myself into that box just like that. But the truth is, for me, it's a starting point, and then I go from there.
Very nice.
Lee.
Could you talk a little bit about your service on the various boards and how the boards work? Are you advisory, or do you have the keys to the museum?
So every board wants one thing out of you. That's not really that complicated. Not that complicated. However, it's first of all completely not true what I said. And secondly, what you get out of the boards is way more important than what you give to the boards because you're going to get a lot more, you're going to give a lot more. So I'm on one board as an example, which is my favorite board and my real passion, which is the Western Wall tunnels, the tunnels under the old city. And that's 2,800 years of not just Jewish history, Muslim history, Christian history, Byzantine history, Roman history, of course. And there I kind of sort of have the keys. I would never say that publicly, but I do 200-300 tours a year there. I take people to do that. And that's a board where, because of the access that they give me to see the new digs and to meet the archaeologists and to really be a true subject matter expert on something, so I give them some shekels and they like that, but what they give me in return is my ability to express my passion for it. And then when I take you there, you're going to say, oh my God, I couldn't have ever imagined that there's such a place on the whole planet. And I've had that. So that's a board where there's some give and a lot of take. On the Hirshhorn board, as an example, I've got good connections in the Senate and the Congress. I'm very active in pro-Israel politics. So that's my value add. But what am I getting from the Hirshhorn? It's amazing. I'm meeting people like you all day long who are passionate for art, for love art, who I'm learning from all the time, learning about deaccessioning. Our last board meeting, that's what we talked about. And it was staggering what goes into that whole concept. We talked about it a little bit last night. So I like to find boards where the people are great, where I'm passionate about the subject, where I can learn, and where I can give in return. And hopefully there's symbiosis and synergy between all of them. It's not always the case. I'm interested in Asia. I think Asia is where all the growth is economically, and lots of growth in Asia from so many different perspectives. And my fund invests from Asia into Israel. Okay, so I'm doing all this work in Israel anyway. Now I'm trying to expand my horizons in Asia. So the Asia Society Board is a perfect place to do that. And then the Asia Society Board brought the Hirshhorn Board. So it's kind of, there's a network within my own head a little bit, and then it expands.
That's a good question.
you see on, we're talking about the switch from galleries to fairs and how that speeds up the collection process or how, the decision-making process, and where you think that's going in terms of how that affects the art, you know, the collectors and ultimately, I guess, the value, whether it's more spiritual or economic. I don't know, it seems like an interesting point, especially given technology and everything else we're experiencing being sped up in our lives, and curious on your
Speaking from a board member who's also an
BA or something.
It's a really it's an important question that you have asked. The issue is that I don't think we know where we're going, first of all, because it's all based on technology. Now, if they come up with a 3D technology of some form, then what will happen is that you'll get to see an exhibition, let's say in Singapore, right here. You'll put on some kind of a goggles or something like that, and you'll get this kind of virtual tour. Does it mean the same thing and being in front of a Mona Lisa or a Chagall? That has a completely different kind of a chemical sort of reaction, right? We know that. That's the reason we make these pilgrimages to artworks and to museums. We go to these far-flung places. Why? We want to encounter that work. But it gives you, let's say you are a poor student from a small village in India and you have a desire to know and learn, and that's what it's doing. You know, you can today, you can get a lecture from University of Oregon right in a village in India. You know, right there. And that's the democratic side of art. And the technology has given us access to it. And maybe another layer of it. If you really are deeply interested in something, then you want to go out and you're going to create the resources to go and actually be in front of the work of art. But the problem is certain works of art will communicate better on the internet, right? Just like, and not every piece of work that you're seeing will be translating as well. And that's where the difficulty lies. And so we're going to adjust, and we meaning as a society, we're going to adjust, just like publishing, what the print media and televisions like to grab onto certain kind of images. And we know that. You were talking about the Jeu de Paume, you know, where Caillebotte actually has a collection of this impressionist work. And how did those artists become very famous as opposed to other equally important impressionist artists did not get the recognition? And what happens? What happens to the market? Why certain artists become famous? Two artists appearing at the same time, one will become famous, and there's a reason for that. And we are trying to understand that because marketing has become an enormous part of the art world. And you can't deny that that itself has become an art form. And if you don't market it properly, no matter how great a talent you are, no one is going to know about it because we live in a kind of Instagram, Facebook society culture where the only thing really this idea of attention, to grab your attention, it's become the top sort of the priority. How do I get your attention, you know? And in terms of marketing, in terms of presentation and dissemination of information, that has become key because we are used to this, the 10 seconds, you know. We look at something and that's it. And that's why the galleries, and if you go to a museum today, I see you go to this blockbuster exhibition, everything is done based on framework of an image that they're going to put it back in Instagram.
Yeah.
It's hardly ever, and you get tired when you go to a museum. You go to a museum of modern art. You go to see a Kusama show.
Oh gosh.
Unbelievable, and that Infinity Room has killed it all for us. You know that they're lining up all night. I saw in Seattle, all night long. I went there in the morning to go to Starbucks, and these kids are lining up. And I said, why? Because they were all wanting to take the Infinity Room for the Instagram.
I got one here if you want to see it.
Right.
So
No,
it's interesting what is happening. It's not necessarily bad. It's just that's what's happening, and we got to sort of react to that.
So how do you think that affects the artists themselves and the kind of work that artists create? Do you think it has an impact, or artists just create what they create? Or do you think artists are looking out there and saying, oh, I need my work to be X, Y, and Z? Or
Again, that's a very important point, and we have had discussions about this because ultimately artists are human beings, just like any one of us, right? And they have to pay their bills, and they have to do all the kind of things that we have to do. But the artists, what they tend to do, and what's really important in today's world, is that they impose themselves with a set of problems, and they go about solving that problem. And something that what we are encountering today in this kind of technological world, we don't know the problems, and the problems will be imposed on you, and then we have to go about solving it. So it's a good example to look at what they have been doing. So I think some artists are sensitive and they are dropping out, or they don't care, or they have the resources to get back. Parents will support them. Other artists are absolutely falling apart, and then some of the other artists are they're becoming very savvy about it, and they're becoming better marketeers, and they're taking over the roles of a gallery. And you'll see a shift taking place where the artists will be selling their work directly when the internet world takes over.
or they have an agent who's not quite a gallerist, who might be a collector too, or something that's championing them in some ways. It's kind of getting mushy out there.
It's this kind of a borderless world.
Yeah.
Will people buy art over the internet, expensive art, without having actually seeing and touching it?
So I've sold over $1 million piece through this interaction with.
I won't even buy a suit online. It's unbelievable. They ship them to my house, like 20 of them, and then I try them on, I ship them back.
But this is what you're getting, right? What has happened is that the first encounter was to the internet. All the negotiations were done on the internet, and then they flew in with the curator.
Ah, okay.
And the final step was done when they came in and checked it out.
Wow.
So.
Wow.
I've spent a bunch of time in Cuba. I think Cuba's, I love Cuba. I think Cuba's the real place to be looking for art, because the artists are not commercialized. And if you go to, I'm sure you've been, if you go to the
collection.
Oh, I don't connect with Cuban art, but I love the artists, and that's a place to go hang out and look at art, because they're untarnished by much of this
South Asia maybe
stuff
too.
that's going on.
That
Yeah.
might be a good one too.
Yeah.
Listening to you talk and knowing how technology is affecting other things, I have this vision of art flying around the world. Is it moving more?
Physically moving, yes.
And are people buying and selling faster?
Well, if you see, 20 years ago, there weren't that many collectors. Today, to have a work of art in your house is something, it's a prerequisite of being a cultured individual. And it's a requirement. If you have acquired a certain amount of wealth, art is a part of that. Before you would have a fancy car or a big house. And this is really true in Asia. They're buying art and they're creating collections all across. And they're really, there's a tremendous amount of competition going on. Who will create a better collection? Then what happens next, we don't know.
Yeah.
Bankruptcy.
They haven't gone, well, it hasn't gone to a point where they're not talking about, well, in China, they're building thousands of museums.
Yeah.
But that museums also tend to be kind of commercial projects. You don't know. But it's a step towards it. You know?
Yeah. Oh yeah, there's so many. I know, we want to train all those professionals here.
Yes, I would like you to just continue in that vein. I mean, you have a collector, gallerist on either side of you. How would you see the role of the academic museum, such as we have here, evolving in this kind of an environment?
Yes, to me, after the last 24 hours, it's very straightforward. It's like an academic medical school. Why wouldn't it be exactly the same? Maybe not saving lives, saving minds, but why? I mean, there's so much integration going on here. Just the students I met at lunch from all over the world, the different programs. There's so many things we don't know what it means to how do you collect art? Why do you collect art? How do you curate? The subject matter is quite significant, and academia is the best place to do it. And then you throw them into the real world here, and then you bring kids in. You know, half the people I saw today were young kids, and you throw in athletes. You put it all together, and you've created an environment where coming out the other end are accredited, smart, knowledgeable, experienced people, all within the tenure of being in 4 years or 2 years in the master's program. I'm way more interested in academic museums than I ever was.
That was a really short time, but thank you. That's so great. We did our job.
Well, yes, I have a question. Given that you have looked at some different academic museums, how do you see us compared to others?
I mean, this is very welcoming here. First of all, it's very welcoming. The people are very welcoming. It's been great working with Jill, number one. And number two, the space is amazing. Many of the museums kind of see it as either as an afterthought or the academias don't. This space here is outstanding. And I think that you can do a lot with the space here. And you can take in a lot more art. You have the program, the master's program. Boston doesn't have that. Many states don't have it. And we've talked extensively about this. I have ideas on how to get some of these collectors to get involved here. And that's something that we'll follow up on because you have the space and you have the program.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, Cheryl, and then Ken.
If we were to hire you as a consultant, not to get, say, the collectors involved, but computer science faculty and students coming to the museum and using the collection to teach. Any thoughts on how to connect art with computer science?
$10,000. We're doing some great work at the Hirshhorn that I'll share with you. On the very cutting edge of how to integrate technology with art, such that now. I suppose we can have a really good conversation about this because the medium that I like is relating to the art here, and the second you take out your machine, it changes your relationship with what you're doing. But notwithstanding that, the technologies that we're actually developing at the Hirshhorn, I don't know how much of this is confidential or not, but it creates a relationship where you become a subject matter expert in the art while you're standing there in front of the art, using different senses. And this is something that we'll license out. So there's a lot that could be done using technology to bring people closer to art that I think would be hugely beneficial. And you're seeing it's not commercial. It's not going to tell you how much you can go buy that for, right? Hopefully we can keep it out of that realm, but strictly within the academic and intellectual realm. So I'll definitely share some interesting things that we're doing with you.
And we have done some things. Ken's got a question, but he's also one of our partners in terms of technology.
Yeah, my question just kind of escaped me because I got to thinking about that. Good question. So, I'll pump that for a second. My question was, the discussion about the fair has got me really thinking. It's kind of blown my mind a little bit, so I'm learning a lot. In that conversation, I recently listened to a podcast about the concept of an art free port.
The concept of a what?
Freeport.
And what I'm an understudy here, community member in training, and so it was interesting where the idea was the art sales piece, acquisition piece is booming, and it's advantageous to acquire the art as an asset, but not to show it, but to put it in giant warehouses where nobody knows where it is, very safe. And they described it very much kind of like a Indiana Jones, thousands and thousands of crates. And it's this Planet Money podcast, and she kind of went there, and someone, kind of secretly showed it to her, and kind of, I was curious, in the same way you described an art fair, is the art free port, is it a legit thing that you're kind of thinking about?
It's tax-free because there's no use.
Is it a threat? Is it a thing? I felt when I heard it, I thought, oh man, what a bunch of beautiful things that I won't get to see, whether curated or online or otherwise. I was just kind of curious your thoughts on it.
Actually, Singapore has a big free port. And of course, Switzerland has huge, historically speaking, they've had it for a long time, and many other countries. But Singapore, what they've done is that when you are bringing in these artworks, and one collector had brought in a really large number of these giacomettis, and they were like hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, and they felt they've been kept in a free port, right? So why not show those works? It's because they can't quickly amass this collection. So they wanted to create a space where you're given a kind of a governmental clearance. You can show it, and then you take it back. So we keep our things in Freeport, for instance. Everyone does. It's very common. So if you, let's say, you bought a work of art from a art stage.
Don't listen
which is
to
art
him.
fair in Singapore. And you are not really, you're going to keep it in Singapore for a while. You're not sure where you're going to take it. And then what happens, you don't have to pay the tax. And then we can borrow that work for 1 year, a period of a year. We can bring it over to the gallery.
Oh,
And
wow.
the Freeport has the ability to give you the clearance.
Okay.
And so instead of just bringing it for 1 year, they thought, why not bring it for 3 years or longer period? And it's a part of innovation that's going
Okay.
on. All of these things are new, and what you've raised is very important.
What
Right.
you just described is in the back of my head when I heard that. I wonder if someone makes the connection and say, well, we'll take good care of it. Get your tax benefit, which makes perfect economic sense, but let's let it be seen.
But we have some works that come here that have been in Freeport.
It's because the people actually want them on their walls now. They let us show them before it goes into California. But but we only get a very small group of what's actually in these Freeports. And a lot of people collect for investment. So that the other people are helping them buy works and they don't have this passion for art. To them, it's just, they think it's a good investment and they've got enough of a portfolio to take risks and losses, and they never look at it.
That's pretty amazing,
It's
isn't
a
it?
commodity.
It's
amazing.
what happened is somewhere along the line, I think this really happened the beginning of this century. The banking world and the hedge fund group somehow moved into the technology world, hasn't gone into it the way
Yeah.
the banking world
True,
has
that's
moved
right.
in.
Hedge fund
And
guys.
they thought, okay, you can diversify your portfolio, and that's a language we are hearing more and more. And 5 or 10%, And so imagine billions of dollars,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, yeah.
And even a percentage
Absolutely.
of that moved into art world. So there are people who are selling 2 or 3 impressionist work at that's the kind of numbers they're using. And it happens day in and day out,
Right, yeah, true. You could probably take one more, Sharon?
So I'm thinking about my favorite museums, for which Visual de Palma is one. Like, I couldn't possibly, it's like I make a beeline to go there. But what goes on for me, and I think this is true for collectors and it's just true for the museum experience, it's not about just the city building and marketing. It is about the landscape space. I think that great museums are often and hopefully in great places. And so what they do is they not only are embracing what is inside, but they are place markers. They are stanchions. They like convene public space. And what's so fabulous about these great museums is you're going inside of them and you're having an internal experience. You might even be having an I-thou experience, which is why who's Martin Buber, but I'm thinking about that spiritual thing that we all feel no matter what religion we're coming from. But at the same time, they're also beaming this energy out, and they're holding, and this is something that our kids are beginning to sense. I mean, for me, the challenge, my kids are about the same age as Yitz's kids, and I'm like going, Mother's crazy about art, and Mom, like it doesn't necessarily work for them to love art, but they get the space thing. They understand this relationship that goes from art with Instagram to like when we go on a trip to a foreign country, where is that museum and what's around that museum? And so it's very exciting for all of us to be part of that world and to have you come to our amazing space with these wonderful
There we got the zodiacs. Ai
the
Weiwei's
way the
just out the
campus
window.
is designed. And what's going on is it's not by accident that this museum just happens to be right here in the middle. We are holding the energy of, what are these things called, these corridors on campus?
Or an nexus? No.
Yeah, but there's a name for them in landscape architecture.
Alleys?
Well, they are, but our whole campus is made of these pathways. And I can't, if Ron were here, he would tell us why, but these are the things we hold on to, just like the Tuileries Gardens is on that axis.
So that's a really great point to end on, because if we're talking about either sacred spaces or spaces and how we live in the built landscape, this is why you have to come tomorrow. Because to understand, I think, why Tiger City is so amazing, and to see it from someone's perspective that has been fascinated with this place since you were in your 20s, right?
Yeah.
And really conveys that. It's like an experience. I mean, you experience it in watching this, but it's that kind of thing, right? So.
Yeah, I'm very excited to show it because, you know, there is a big following of Louis Kahn in Eugene.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, that's tomorrow at 7. But thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed it. A stimulating conversation. Appreciate all of you being here and all your questions too. And please join me in thanking our guests.